In this module, we'll talk about Iacra and the TSA. Iacra is the Integrated Airman Certificate and Rating Application website, and this is the FAA tool that you use to apply for a new certificate or added rating. So this will be required for anybody who's applying for an ATP or a type rating. The TSA runs the Alien Flight Student Program, and it's used to clear non-U.S. citizens for training. So if you're not a U.S. citizen, you'll need to follow the TSA process. Click on the buttons at right for more details on either program. Pilots who are not U.S. citizens must receive clearance to train from the TSA prior to simulator training. There's no exceptions to this rule. The TSA divides pilots into 4 categories depending on the type of training planned. Category 1 is for your first heavy type rating. That's 12,500 pounds or more, and we understand that that's not the same as the FAA's definition of heavy training, but welcome to the TSA. Category 2 is if you're adding a second heavy type rating. So if you have a Learjet type rating or something that's heavier than 12,500 pounds, and now you're coming to a 737 type rating or an A320 type rating, that fits you. Category 3 is not applicable to FTI training, and Category 4 is applicable when you're coming for recurrent or requalification training. If you haven't started the TSA process, don't delay. The wait period can be up to 30 days after they mail a fingerprint receipt to you. Once you go to the TSA website, request approval for Category 1, 2, or 4 training as appropriate. Enter TBD for the course ID. Enter the aircraft type and you can omit the series. So for example, you would enter 737 as opposed to 737, 300, 800 Classic or NG. Just the type is all that's needed. Select Flight Training International in Denver as the training location because this is our corporate office, and this is important. Don't select the actual training location if it's somewhere other than Denver. You might be training in Miami, you might be training in Dallas, but the FTI office is located in Denver, and for the TSA purposes, you need to select Denver as the training location. You can click on the link here to go to the TSA website to start the process, or you can go to the next slide by clicking the chevron at the lower right. This module will show you how to complete an application for a new ATP certificate or added type rating in Iacra. The Integrated Airman Certificate and Rating Application, or IACRA, is the FAA's online tool for certificate applications. We provided the link here in blue. Before you start your application, you'll need to have the following documents handy: your pilot certificate, the city, state, and county of birth as indicated on your birth certificate, a completed copy of FTI Form 8710, the Record of Pilot Time Worksheet. This was provided to you via DocuSign, and it can also be found in Comply 365. Using this form will ensure you have the correct hours for an ATP, and you'll need a copy of your FAA medical certificate if you have one. The slides in this presentation will advance automatically, but you can always hit pause at any point if you want to take a closer look at the application. Follow the link to the IACRA website and either log in or register. If you've never established an account, click Register from the sign-in page and follow the prompts to create a username and password. Write the username and password down, then copy them to your smartphone. You're going to need these on the day of your check, so don't lose them and be sure you bring them with you to training. Once you have an account, record the following: your FTN, which is your federal tracking number, your username, and your password. You'll notice we've mentioned the username and password twice already. That's because they're important. Don't lose them. Provide your FTM number to the sales rep so they can affiliate you with FTI, and we'll also load that into Mint so that your check airman has access to it. In order to take your check ride, you'll need to provide the FTN to the examiner, and you'll also have to log into IACRA, so it's important that you bring this information to your training because we can't commence the check ride without it. Before starting an application, verify your user profile information. This is especially true for existing users. Select the user profile and verify the contents because this is the information that populates your 8710. It needs to be correct or your application will be rejected by the FAA. Check the Do Not Use box under Social Security number, and once you've verified your profile information, select Save at the bottom of the page. Once you've verified your profile information, you can select either Start Application or Start New Application. Under Application Type, select Pilot. Under Certifications, select Airline Transport Pilot if you'll be applying for either an ATP rating or an added type rating. Select Standard if you have the 1,500 hours and otherwise meet the requirements for an unrestricted ATP. If you have less than 1,500 hours total pilot time, choose Restricted further down on the list. You'll get a restricted ATP, and once you have the required hours, you can have the restriction removed at the local FSDO. Next, select CFR 142 Graduate of an Approved Course, then select Original Issuance if you're getting an ATP rating. For pilots who already hold an FAA ATP rating and all you're doing is adding an additional type rating, then choose Added Type Rating.
If you don't have the required hours for an unrestricted or a standard ATP, apply for the restricted ATP. You'll choose the restricted ATP and then the CFR 142 Graduate of an Approved Course, just like on the preceding slide. Then choose yes or no for the 1,500 hours and choose whether it's a military or a degree program. Remember, you'll need to bring the appropriate documentation to the practical test in order to apply if you're applying under 61160. IACRA includes a link to the appropriate regulations if you have any questions, and you'll find that on the right side of the page. It's not pictured in the snip here.
Next, select Airplane Multi-Engine Land under the Certificate category and class, and then select the radio button for designation code and type in F3TX in the box. The Current Operator Training Center selection box will populate with Flight Training International, Inc., Denver, Colorado. The next section contains your personal information. This is populated from the Profile Update page. Please ensure that your email and phone number are correct, or more specifically, that someone will be able to reach you at that number if there's an issue with your application. This is the quickest way for the FAA to get a hold of you and clarify any questions they may have. And if you've listed an address, which is maybe your permanent address, or a phone number where you won't be able to get back to, they're not going to be able to reach you. Once you're happy with the information here, select Save and Continue. The Certificate Held section is populated from FAA data for the most part, but you do need to make some selections here. Section G, English Language, needs to be checked Yes. It's a requirement for any FAA certificate that you're proficient in English language, and if there's any doubt, we need to assess that prior to your training, because if you're not English language proficient, the FAA requires removal of your certificates, and obviously we don't want that to happen. Section M, the existing FAA Airman certificates, is populated from the FAA's database, and then add or modify a certificate is only used if you're applying on the basis of a foreign certificate, or if you've been issued a temporary certificate and then you're going to apply on the basis of that. Once you choose this section, it will open another menu and you can select the appropriate data there. Finally, you'll review the All Certificates information. This bottom section shows what the FAA thinks you hold now, not what you're applying for. Review the Certificates Held section. You must have at least a commercial category, airplane multi-engine land, instrument airplane certificate. It's okay if there's more than this check, but this is the minimum. When you're done, click on Save Certificate. The basis of issuance section should appear as shown here. Verify the training agency as Flight Training International, Inc., Denver, Colorado, and the certificate number is F3TX428K. Choose Save and Continue. Once you've completed the worksheet, then all you need to do is transpose the numbers from the worksheet into Iacra. Don't forget to populate the AMEL time. It's easy to miss, and this is a common reason for applications being rejected by the FAA. When you're done, click Save. There are two additional tabs that can be populated with pilot flight time: glider, lighter than air hours, and simulator and training device or ATD hours. You can fill in the time for whatever you have flown, but under the FFS, the flight simulator time, put at least 4 hours of total time. That'll cover the check ride. Listing your total simulator time for the course is probably your best bet though. You can check your lesson plan, or you can look in Mint for the total sim hours scheduled for your training, and you can log that time here, but you're not allowed to put in more than 50 hours total. Save and then choose Save and Continue when you're done with all three categories. The wording in Section 5 often causes confusion with pilots. It's not asking if you've ever failed any check ride, just this particular check. So unless you failed the check ride for this certificate which you're currently applying, the answer to this question is no. The website will then do a check on the information you've entered. If there are no errors, it will look like the screenshot here, with a summary of how your pilot certificate will look after the check at the bottom. Select View Privacy Act, and the text of the Privacy Act will pop up. Read the text and then select Close. Select Review so that you can review your application in its entirety, and once you've reviewed your application for accuracy, select Close. It's a good idea to print a copy of your application and bring it with you to training. From time to time, we'll run into a problem with Iacra, and we'll either have to submit a new application or even revert to paper. In either case, if you have a printed copy of the application with you, it makes it a lot faster and easier to generate an accurate copy of your application. After you've opened, reviewed, and closed both the Privacy Act and your application, select the green Submit Application button. At the conclusion of the application process, the final screen should look something like this. Your application is now on file, but it has not really been submitted. On the day of your check, the examiner will verify your identity, and then you'll sign into Iacra and submit the application. This is how you present yourself electronically for the check. You must sign in prior to the beginning of the check, and that's why it's so important that you bring your FTN, your username, and your password to training so that you can complete the final steps. Once the check begins, there are only 3 possible outcomes. The check can be passed, failed, or discontinued. The examiner will sign off the results of your oral and check immediately after each is complete. Depending on the outcome of the check, you'll receive a temporary airman certificate digitally signed by the TCE if you pass, and you'll have to sign it in ink, although this can be done at any time. It doesn't have to be done immediately after the check. If you fail, you'll receive a notice of disapproval. This will also be digitally signed, and it indicates which maneuvers were performed satisfactorily. This paper will have to be presented at the next check or the recheck, so don't lose it. If the check is discontinued, you'll receive a letter of discontinuance indicating that the check was neither passed nor failed and which maneuvers, if any, were successfully completed. This letter also has to be presented when the check is resumed, so don't lose it or you can't get credit. credit for the items that were previously passed. Permanent plastic certificates are mailed to the applicant, that's you, from the FAA branch office, AFS 760 in Oklahoma City. Temporary airman certificates are valid for 120 days, and the FAA seems to work at about that pace, so don't be surprised if it takes that long. They tend to show up right around the 120-day mark. Notify FTI if you're approaching 120 days, and we can help you with a field extension to your temporary certificate if needed. Keep in mind that your 8710 application is reviewed by an FAA Legal Instrument Examiner. That's the title of the person at AFS 760 who processes these applications, and it might give you a little bit of an insight as to what their mindset is. They're prone to kick applications back for the smallest of errors. Common errors we encounter would be things like missing required flight hours, perhaps the 50 hours of multi-engine land. So make sure you pay attention when you fill out the required hours, especially for the ATP. We also run into problems where the name on the current certificate doesn't match the application. And this can happen when somebody gets married or if somebody has a name change, or it's particularly problematic with pilots from other nations who don't have a common US name and it doesn't always translate very cleanly into English. So make sure the name on the certificate that you currently hold matches what's on your application. The same is true of citizenship. Sometimes pilots will have dual citizenship and you may have changed your citizenship recently, so you're claiming US citizenship, but your FAA certificate still says you're Brazilian or wherever the other citizenship is. So we want to make sure the citizenship matches on your certificate. And then we want to make sure that the limitations transfer cleanly from your old certificate to your new certificate. So perhaps you get a 737 type rating and there's no circling restriction on the 737 type rating. We might even remove a circling restriction on an initial ATP if you earned that at one of the regional carriers. Nevertheless, if you have a type rating on that certificate, that circling restriction would still need to remain in place. So we just need you to double check the certificate and make sure that everything that goes on there is correct. Otherwise, the FAA is going to kick it back and it just delays the process of getting you your final certificate. So the last area to be really careful with is check your FTN and your password just before the practical test. Make sure you can log in from your iPad. During the oral, we're going to need you to log in and acknowledge that you're commencing the oral. And the last thing you want to have happen is a situation where you don't have your username or password, it doesn't work, you've got it off by a character or a space, you're missing a cap, it's written in an encrypted folder and you can't figure it out, because we can't move forward on the oral exam until you acknowledge that you presented yourself for the oral exam. That's bad enough, but your simulator check begins right after the oral. So if we start bleeding over into the simulator check, it's likely that you won't have enough time to finish the check, and then you'll get a letter of discontinuance and have to come back for additional training. So don't set yourself up for failure, set yourself up for success. Make sure you know your FTN, make sure you know your password, log in from your device in the training facility, and make sure it works. Keep Review the certificates held section.